Now, building on last week's conversations, and we had some great conversations last week. We're going to be talking this week about break and bolt action firearms. And we'll be talking about troubleshooting and inspecting those just like we did last week in introductions. But before we move on, I just want to have a quick conversation briefly again concerning the tools that we have. And this week's focus is going to be on having some kind of aid to allow you to safely load and unload after you have troubleshot and or inspected firearms for safety and things of that nature. Now, on this table, you see a mixture of snap caps. You also see some dummy rounds. You also see different types of dummy rounds and even some 22 snap caps. And I didn't know these existed, so I've got some 22 dummy rounds as well as, and it's laying on the table now, a 22 snap cap. And the reason that I have these things laid out in front of you guys is that so that you can take a look at where the primer would be on any of these rounds. Now, you may have to zoom in a little bit on that 22 long rifle, which should be at the right of your screen. But for all of the other calibers, if you look at the snap caps versus the dummy rounds on the snap caps, which will be in purple, you will see like a little rubber piece of something that's sticking right there where the primer would be. Now, that's going to be great for dry firing because you will have to dry fire after you get done troubleshooting and after you get done safety inspecting and things of that nature. So those are going to be good. Dummy rounds, on the other hand, do not have that little plastic nipple or whatever it is right there, the little rubber piece to safely capture that firing pin. So be very careful not to use those when you're dry firing. Those are only used for loading and unloading. Now, let's take a look at some break action firearms and some things that we can do to troubleshoot. Now, here we've got a Topper Model 48, which shoots 410 shotgun shells. Nice little rifle here. We've also got a Rossi 243 Winchester. Now, this is a very interesting rifle because you can change calibers very easy on this specific rifle. Now, back to the Topper. The first thing that you always want to do, of course, is ensure that A, the firearm is unloaded, and B, that the firearm is completely clear. Those are two different things. On this one, it's actually one thing. So basically, you break it open and ensure that the bore is empty. Okay? And you can do a basic inspection, ensure that that bore is clear. And you can also check other things like the feed ramp. You can check the hammer. You can check the trigger mechanisms. You can check all of these things now that A, you've ensured that the firearm is clear, and B, you've broken it open. So you can inspect all of these things to make sure that they are functioning properly. Now, on firearms like this, we also want to make sure that they both load and unload properly. This specific rifle does have a spring tension that allows those spent casings to be basically ejected out with some great force. And once it's loaded, you want to break it open and ensure that that round does eject properly. And as you can see, that did eject with some great force. So you want to be sure that you got an eye on where those things are popping out. Now, this, of course, is the paddle that's used to break open the action of this firearm, and most of your break open action firearms will have a similar paddle or button. Now, to the Rossi 243 Winchester, of course, guys, you always want to make sure that you have no live ammunition present whatsoever. All right. Now, if the firearm does have a safety mechanism, you always want to check to make sure that that is functioning properly at all times, okay? So you always want to make sure that's functioning properly. Now, you can go ahead and break it open, and what we want to do once again is make sure that we look in the bore to ensure that this is clear. And at this time, you can now conduct a function check. And now, Before we move on to the bolt action firearms, there are just a couple of important takeaways that I want to discuss with you guys, again, before we move on to the next action type. The first most important takeaway has to deal with safety. And we always, always, always want to ensure that there is no live ammunition present in the workplace. Now, this will serve, and you've heard me say this a couple of times, guys, but this will serve as an important tool in helping you to train your minds on how to be safe. Understand that it's similar to a math equation, right? In order to have a firearm discharge, you've got 3 different variables. And if you remove one of those variables, then the equation no longer holds true. So if you remove that live ammunition from your workplace, now you can ensure that you cannot and will not have that firearm to discharge. Also, taken from the beginning of this conversation, you must have access to the proper tools. And also remember that sometimes some tools can serve for different purposes. For instance, if you saw the last little video clip, as opposed to having a snap cap or a dummy round, I did have a spent casing there. So I was able to conduct a function check without having those other tools, but I had something that would serve its purpose. So also, guys, remember that you can get creative if you know what you need, if you're safe, and if you have that ability to do so. You also want to check all external functions for operability. You also always want to do that. Now, the reason we do this is because, once again, guys, we are giving these firearms back to their original owner, and they are expecting for us to have ensured that not only this firearm works, but it is safe. So you want to check all external functions. You also want to test and ensure that all major action components are functioning and effective. Remember, like we said last week, there are times that you are going to have to go and conduct some live fire as well. Now, that live fire will make sure that firearm is operating and it is effective and efficient, but it will also show that whatever work you did to it worked, right? And that's what we want to, that is the impression that we want to give off to any customer or any person in which we have taken their firearm to conduct some work on it. And the last most important takeaway goes back to the first most important takeaway, which is always ensure that you don't have any live ammunition present in your workspace. Remember, guys, we're here to train our minds. Now, another type of firearm that you may come in contact with are going to be the bolt action type. And these are very accurate and very easy to operate. Now, this is a Thompson Center Venture, shoots .270 Winchester. As you can see, it does have a very robust bolt. Before we start any work, we always want to ensure that the firearm is both clear, empty, and safe, right? So we do this process twice. We check the bore, we check the breech face, and we also check that magazine well. We can also, at this time, take a look to make sure that bolt rides in very smoothly and locks in. We also want to check any external safety features. We've talked about this before, so you also want to check the functionality of any external safety features. Now, you can go ahead and remove that bolt. And once you've got it out, you want to inspect this bolt very, very well. Okay, we're going to look at the entire external surface to make sure there's no marring, no scratches, no dings, no dents. We're also going to check that bolt face, make sure everything is in working order. And if you need to, now is the time for you to inspect the firing pin and all of that assembly. And like always, guys, we do have some very important takeaways. And these things are just little nuggets that I want to start to drive you guys' thought process and to always, always, always keep these things on the front of your mind. And as always, we want to remain safe, so we want to ensure that there is no live ammunition present in the workplace. What you always want to do, guys, is have a dedicated space for working. And this dedicated space will never, ever, ever have ammunition. This way you can ensure that you're always safe. And this way that you can ensure that any firearms you are working on will not discharge. Also understand that with some firearms, you will have to do different processes and you will have to do different checks when you are troubleshooting and inspecting. Now, as you can remember, the Thompson Center had various other checks that we had to do than those other break action firearms. So just always remember that there may be some additional checks and additional processes that you may have to undergo. Like always, you want to ensure that you check all external functions, especially external safeties, for their operability. But remember, safeties are mechanisms that can fail. So it's on us to ensure that when they leave our hands, they are in working order. The bolt of the firearm is one of the most important. It does a ton of things, guys, from feeding to locking. So you want to make sure that this is in working order. Anytime you're inspecting and troubleshooting a bolt action firearm, make sure that this is in working order. And like always, make sure that you have no live ammunition present in your workplace. This is to ensure that you are safe. Now, as you know, I like to provide you guys at least with a little thought-provoking tidbit, if you will, to get your minds going. And as we have just taken a look at 3 rifles that are very, very, very easy to operate, does simplicity or ease of operation equate to simplicity when it comes to troubleshooting, inspecting, and doing safety checks? And that's a good one to think about, because does it always hold true, or is it not true at all? Let's have a good week, guys. Let's continue the stimulating conversation. Let's get to work.